Did you see the guy? Did you pass by him on the way here today? It's right out there, on the corner of Queen Street and Guelph Ave. He sort of set up this little display on the sidewalk. He took a cinder block, he put it right there on the sidewalk, and he wrote on the side, City of Cambridge. And then he took all these little green army men and these G.I. Joes, and he set up all this siege work around his brick. It says the city's under siege. It's going to fall. But that's not the worst part. That's not the really scary part. He also has put his mat there, right on the sidewalk. And he's lying down there on the sidewalk, lying on his left side. And he says that he's going to stay there for 390 days without moving. And then he's going to get up and he's going to roll over and lie on his right side, and he's going to stay there for 40 days. I know, eh? What a guy. And the worst part is this. The worst part is he's doing this because he heard these voices. He said God told him that he had to do it. I mean, is it any wonder that everyone who passes by that corner crosses the street and walks on the south side? I mean, that and, well, the smell. Because apparently he's decided he's not going to change his clothes and wash for 390 days either. I mean, can you imagine this going on in our very town? Somebody needs to do something, you know, for public security. And I cannot help but think that it was pretty much like that people responded to a guy named Ezekiel, a prophet. When he did basically the same thing. He took a brick, he laid it out on the ground, he put a picture of Jerusalem on it, laid the siege work, and he lied down on the ground for 390 days. People must have reacted with fear, because that's how people react. When people's behavior starts to stray so far from the norm, and Ezekiel was being anything but normal. But here's the remarkable thing. It was also right. For he was indeed doing this because he had heard the very voice of God. And the prophecy he was giving was true. The city of Jerusalem would be put under siege. It would fall. And its people would be carried off to Babylon, where they would remain for about 40 years. You see, the people may have been afraid of Ezekiel and what he was doing, but if only they could get past their fear, they would have heard the very voice of God speaking to them. And what Ezekiel did there, and the reaction that people must have had to him, makes me think of another story. A story of a man that everyone who had ever met was scared, ran away from fear. He lived among the people of the Gerasenes, and I suppose if this man had lived today, he would probably be diagnosed with some form of mental illness. Perhaps, I am no expert on the area of mental illness, and even an expert probably would not have enough data to make any sort of, proper diagnosis, but if you were, I wouldn't be surprised if this guy was suffering perhaps from some form of paranoid schizophrenia, maybe multiple personality disorder. That's how he would be understood perhaps today. But of course, people back then didn't have those kinds of modern understandings. And they understood matters of mental health in terms of purely spiritual forces. And so they understood that this man was suffering from demon possession. See, one of the great things about modern medical science is what it has taught us about mental illness. And by taking it out of the realm of the purely spiritual and helping us to understand that there are indeed medical and chemical and physical causes for these kinds of diseases, it has managed to take away much of the fear that once surrounded those kinds of illness. But the people of the Gerasenes did not have the benefit of this kind of understanding. So they only saw it in terms of these spiritual forces, and this man terrified them. Terrified them to death. And you can see signs of this fear in this story, in how they have treated this man. For we learn that this man has been put under guard, and has been locked in chains and put in fetters. And when even this did not allay the fear of the people, he has been thrown out completely from all human society. And the sad thing about this is that all of this fear reaction, the way that people have treated him, the chains and the fetters and the expulsion from human society, have doubtlessly served to make this man's condition much worse. I mean, perhaps if they had not reacted in such a way, if they had not abused him, if they had not rejected him, maybe he could have found some way to deal with his illness and live among them a decent life. But the fear has made that impossible. And that is the situation that Jesus comes upon when he arrives in the country of the Gerasenes. A man suffering from what we would understand as mental illness, but whose condition has been made far worse by the fear and terror of the local people. And Jesus comes into the story as a real breath of fresh air. Someone who is unique, someone who is different. Why? Because he is not afraid. Jesus is not afraid of this man. Everyone else is, but not Jesus. And even the man himself, even this poor man who suffered so much, thinks that Jesus should be afraid of him. He tries to scare him, yells at him, and screams at him, and cries, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High? I beg you, do not torment me." So you see, this man has also bought into the story he's been told. That he's scary, that people must stay away. And he tries to convince Jesus too. But Jesus is not scared. Then the man tries to scare Jesus by naming himself Legion. Now, of course, the word legion refers to a major division in the Roman army at the time. A division that could include up to 5,000 soldiers. So by calling himself Legion, what the man means is that he is that messed up. That there's that many personalities, that many forces at war within him. Clearly, he tells this to Jesus as well in order to scare Jesus off. But Jesus will not be scared. Jesus will not give up on him. And I think finally, as he does this, as Jesus just persists, as he does not react with fear, he begins to break through to the man. And the man begins to see Jesus as someone different. Maybe someone who can help him. Now the man needs a little bit more than Jesus not showing him fear. He also needs a bit of a demonstration. Something to convince him that his life can really change. That's at least how I understand the whole rather sordid affair with the pigs falling into the water and drowning. I see it as a dramatic demonstration. Something that is designed to shake this man out of his way of seeing himself. But through all of this, through his failure to react with fear, through his persistence, through this dramatic presentation, Jesus does break through to this man and sets him free. Free from these internal demons that haunt him, free from his conditions, free from the effects of fear that have so victimized him. The love of Christ has that kind of power for him. And we are called to share the love of Christ, aren't we? That's why we're here. A few years ago, before I ever came on the scene here, the leadership in this congregation did some work to try and understand and discover how we could best live in Christ and share his love, given the community, given the context that we found ourselves in. One thing they uncovered through that work was kind of surprising, for they discovered that in this area, in the area immediately around this church, in fact, there are relatively high levels of mental illness and related problems like alcohol and drug addiction. And despite this high need, they also discovered that there are relatively low services available to such people. And they looked at that reality, they looked at this truth in our context, and they said, you know what? I think God might be calling us to do something, to expand our ministry to people so affected in our community. And they set that as a priority. And that makes perfect sense to me. I think that it is quite clear that in many ways Jesus is calling us to do what we can to extend our ministry to exactly such people among us. And yet they also acknowledge, as they set that priority, that there was a certain hesitation for people who entirely embrace it. Why? Pretty simply because people found it scary. People found the idea of ministry to those sorts of people a little bit scary. And you know what? There are some good reasons for why people found it scary. Some legitimate reasons. I think one reaction that we have is that when we think of ministry to such people, we think, well, what can we do? We don't have the knowledge. We don't have the ability to effectively minister to such people. What can we do? It's a legitimate fear. But it's one that can be addressed, of course, by learning more. And maybe especially by making use of those who have the skill and the knowledge to help. There's also maybe a bit of hesitation, a bit of fear, because people who do suffer from mental illnesses can at times be unpredictable. So there's an understandable fear of what might go wrong. An understandable concern. And one that needs to be addressed in terms of putting proper protections and understanding in place. So there's understandable hesitations there, but I think there's also something else. There are also fears that go deeper, that need to be addressed. As I said, modern medical science has helped us to take a very different look at matters of mental illness, see them in a different light, take it out of the realm of spirituality and the fear of dark and evil demons, that association with evil that was there. So we have the tools to understand it differently, and yet at the same time, those deep superstitions don't just disappear. And for many of us, they're still there, they're still down underneath. There's an irrational fear there as well. There's also maybe a certain fear that because we see in those who suffer from mental illness a certain reflection of ourselves. A fear that maybe what they have could come to us or to the people that we love. There's a fear. I know it's an irrational one, but but even a fear that maybe their mental conditions can be contagious, that they might ultimately affect us. I know that makes no logical sense. But you see, the thing about fear is it doesn't have to make logical sense for it just to affect us and hold us back. So I think the fear is there and it needs to be acknowledged. And the problem with fear, as I've said, is the problem with fear is, especially when you're dealing with things like mental illness, is that they have this way of making things worse. They make it worse, like happened for that man among the Gerasenes. They make it worse from those who suffer from the illness. They make it worse for the community. And those fears also make it worse for us. At least if we allow them to get in the way of us embracing a ministry that our God is calling us to embrace. So the fear is a serious matter. And that's why I think it's so helpful and meaningful to look at Jesus and what he does and says in this passage. Because I really feel that's the key thing that Jesus does. I mean, yes, I understand that Jesus does miraculous things for this man, things we cannot understand or explain. But I really believe that the one thing that he does that has the greatest effect of all is simply this. He fails to be afraid of this man. And that's where it begins. And that's where it makes all the difference. The fear matters most in this story. I mean, you see that at the end of the story. When Jesus has come along and he's helped this man, set him free, has addressed the mental illness that has affected him, and all of the symptoms of that mental illness have disappeared. They are gone. All of the symptoms, if you're stuck thinking of it the way the Gerasenes did, all of the symptoms of demon possession have gone. And the man sits quietly discussing with Jesus. And when that happens, how do the local people react? I found this stunning. How do they react? They found the man from whom the demons had gone sitting at the feet of Jesus, clothed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. They are still afraid. The problem has been dealt with, but the fear remains. And then they come to Jesus and they say to Jesus, they tell him to get out of here. And Jesus leaves. This is surprising. Because remember, when it was Legion talking to Jesus, trying to threaten him, trying to scare him away, Jesus would not leave. Jesus would not give up on this guy. But now when the local people tell Jesus to leave, he goes. Because Jesus may have taken care of the medical illness, but the problem of fear remains. And there will not be complete healing until that problem is addressed. It remains the most serious problem in this story, the fear. And that's why I think we can do so much in terms of embracing the ministry to those who are affected in such ways. Because I know that we do not have the kind of miraculous power that Jesus had to bring healing to those who suffer. Though we can still pray to the same God that Jesus prayed. And I know we don't have the skill and knowledge that is available to medical professionals who can help people through things like medicine and counseling and therapy. Though I hope we can create some space and ways in which they can do what they do best. So no, we don't have special abilities, but we do have one thing. We can choose to not be afraid. And by choosing to not be afraid, I think that we can have the greatest impact of all. By choosing not to be afraid ourselves, by teaching others not to be afraid, we can have a real impact. story. Jesus turns to this man, formerly known as Legion. He's been changed. He's been set free from his personal demons, from his personal illness. He's been set free from the effects of the fear of others. And Jesus says you can go on your way, but he sends him off with an assignment. Return to your home and declare how much God has done for you. That is all of our task. We are all given that task to tell what God has done for us. And imagine if, because of what we're able to do here, because of what we're able to learn here, we could go and return to our homes and our places of work and the people that we see during the week and say, God has set me free from my fear of those whose minds are different. What a story that would be to tell. Would you take a few moments, silent?